his best friend came over and it was like, you need to get your ham radio license. And that was cool. And it opened up a whole new world for me because we joined the local radio club.
Oh, that's
cool. And the guys at the radio club were the radio techs that worked for the railroads and the local like Motorola service centers and stuff like that. So I had a whole world of these Elmers basically that I got to learn everything from.
Welcome to the show. Today's guests are Lee and Jessica from 10-8 Technologies. We're so excited to have you guys here.
Thank you.
Glad to have us.
Yeah, we're excited.
Glad you're having us.
I want to kick off and just, can you guys tell our viewers, these are loyal podcast listeners. It was so fun. We met at FDIC this year. Tell a little bit about your experience with the 2448 show and how you guys met our team this year recently. I'm so excited that you're here to visit in person with it.
So that's hilarious. Like I'm a kind of a podcast nerd now. So honestly, I can't remember which podcast I was listening to. It could have been National Fire Radio, I think, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
And I think he might have mentioned the 2448. And I was like, oh, all right, I'll check that out. And then, so I watched the, which I can't remember which, you know what? I think the first episode I watched was with Ryan from 1075.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're one of their, we're a first in products dealer.
Oh, right on. Okay,
and
cool.
I love those guys. They're like awesome. And like we share like information back and forth all day. I think he's really good. And I was like, oh, they're on. I want to watch that. And I was like, all right, I need to go watch the first episode, which was with you and your wife.
Oh yeah.
And your story. And I was just like, oh man, I totally get Sam. And I was like, Jessica, you need to listen to this.
And then I was like, oh.
I was like,
we're not
he
alone.
hated school. I hated school. And I was like, we just wanted to like do our own thing. And I was like, so it was kind of funny. And that's how we kind of got listening to the podcast.
So when he went to FDIC, you were like, I need to see this person, and you were on the list. So he was like, let's go say hi to Sam. I'm really loving his podcast. And
it's so fun.
So, yeah.
So it's hilarious. Now, after we saw you guys at FDIC and I left, I realized like, I've met him before.
Oh, really?
It was one of the Rosenbauer rodeo shows up in Lamont because I was there because we my one fire department where I work part time now. We're building an engine, and so we went to the rodeo to look at stuff. And you were there with your little squad truck. Truck. And I just remember this guy coming up to me just like happy-go-lucky, like shaking my hand. I was like, man, he has so much energy, but I really didn't know the Fire Tech brand at all.
That's so funny.
So it was kind of funny that I was like, it all clicked. I was like, I met him before.
Oh yeah, that's so funny. Yeah,
I was like, I had no idea he was the owner.
Business and travel and networking are all intertwined. I think especially in our business, it's all about like who you meet, how you go out there and just hit the street. And so like miles equate to connections, and so the number of miles you can put on a truck, the number of connections you can make, ultimately that's what drives revenue. But it's like that's the requirement. People are like, when people set sales goals, they say like, oh yeah, you got to go sell X number of things. But it's like, actually, I need to go meet X number of people, because if I meet X number of people and some percentage of those people are purchasing public and then some percentage of those people are in the market for what we make, we're going to generate revenue. But it's just a game of how many hands can I shake in what amount of time, and that'll help generate the thing. So it's funny. Well, we're glad you guys made it. Can you tell me, what does 10-8 Technologies do? I think the 10-8, obviously, back in service, sounds like a radio call sign. I love it. What's the background?
Technology keeping you in service.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Okay, cool.
So, so I started the company with a friend of mine back in 2016. We were actually ham radio friends.
Nice.
And so I've been into radio forever, and I've been in the fire service for like 21 years. So like it was just kind of a natural thing.
Yeah.
I was working as a full-time fire dispatcher at the time, and we just kind of got together and was like, hey, do you think we can do this business? And I was like, in the area, the market's kind of changing. Like a lot of those shops they're getting older. Guys are starting to retire.
What were you guys going to do? What
just
specifically?
Radios.
Radio
okay,
work,
yeah. Service work, repeater work, and stuff. Because we, as ham, like we were building. We built quite a network of a repeater system in the Chicago area, specifically doing like Skywarn severe weather spotting and stuff.
Oh,
like
yeah.
That was kind of like our thing. And so it was just kind of like, let's do it. And I was already, when I got out of high school, I worked for a couple mom and pop radio shops while I was on the fire department before I went full-time dispatching.
Yeah.
But it even goes back, when I was in high school, I actually did some internships at Chicago shops during the summer just to kind of get my feet wet to see what it was like. And we got to, build squad cars and tune radios on service monitors. So like I've been a radio nerd since I was little. I got it from my dad. So just the story was my dad was a volunteer fireman, but an electrician mechanic. Like if it had any type of electricity or bolted together, he worked on it. So the joke is he had a radio room, and so when I would cry, he would pick me up and go rock me listening to the radio traffic.
That's awesome.
So
and it's not stop sign.
So you could turn a radio on, I'll fall asleep. Yeah. So which didn't make really good for being a nighttime dispatcher, but no.
That's awesome. Did you have a background loving radios too, or what was your?
No, I'm like, as far as 10-8 is concerned, I'm the business, the marketing. I'm the accountant right now, which is not fun. But it's interesting how things in your childhood just kind of pop up throughout the years. And I didn't grow up with anybody in the fire service. So a friend of mine, Sarah, her dad, Harold, he was on our local fire department. When I became friends with her, she invited me over to her house one day. And I remember going in there and hearing like scanner, radio, something. Oh, yeah. And I'm
such a big part of the volunteer fire world.
And I'm like, what is that? And she's like, oh, look, it's up here. It's our scanner. And I was like, and it's on all the time. And she's like, yeah, so we can hear like what calls are going on, or my dad can hear what's going on, or when he's at the firehouse, you know, we know what's going on. And I'm like, all the time? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, now flash forward to now my house has been on all the time. Radios all the time. I actually think I used to like when people would come over and they didn't know. And then all of a sudden you hear tones drop and they're like, what is happening? What is happening? I'm like, oh, that's all the radios down there. Somebody's got a call. And then they're like, oh, this is all the time. So this is my life now, is radios.
And you guys are a husband and wife pair?
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah. And so similar in our business, my wife and I run this company, and it's a fun connection to make with other business owners that are, you know, both family and professional at the same time.
I didn't come on until 2020.
Oh, wow.
So
it was kind of basically you didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
So
walk me back. Tell me about the first days of your business. So originally it was you and another ham operator that started 10-8. What was that like? What was kind of the first couple of days and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it was just kind of mostly it was just we were doing service work.
Yeah.
You know, basically fixing everybody else's stuff.
For fire departments, or was it more like
most of it was my clientele was fire department. So it was, you know, everybody knew me as the radio guy.
Yeah.
So like they're like, hey, you started a business? I did. They're like, cool. I need this repaired. I need this repaired.
Yeah.
And it just kind of started from that and just kind of grew. And then it's like, okay, now we need to try to like get products to rep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like that's not easy to get into that type of a market.
Could you service, like, I guess whoever's radio you have, you could service someone's radio without being one of their specific dealers or something?
Yeah. So like in our backyard, like Motorola Motorola and Kenwood were prominent. And I was a Motorola Kenwood nerd. So
so you knew this stuff.
I already had I invested in all the programming software and all the cables.
Really?
So like it was, you know, it was just basically like, okay, we basically like did a couple sales and then bought a service monitor, you know, and then buy some power meters, you know.
Yeah.
And our own personal tools and stuff, and just kind of started going from there.
So for someone that may not know, I learned the term earlier, land mobile radio or LMR. So someone that might not know that world, when you think about, you know, if I'm picturing 80s CB radios, it's like you press a button and it talks. But these radio systems today are way more sophisticated, and they have programming and like, so your service stuff is, you're setting up like the different channels and subnets and Viper, like all that. Is that kind of the place that you played in originally, where you're doing configurations of complex stuff, or was it more like actually fixing PCBs and putting crystals in? And that
a little bit of both.
Really?
So, yeah. I mean, like, you know, it's funny. So like in 2012 is when the government mandated narrow banding in the radio world.
What does that mean for those?
So it was the bandwidth in which it transmitted on. So that drove basically sales through the roof, because until that time, 2012, when we had to go and upgrade all these radios, I was pulling crystal controlled radios from the 60s out of fire trucks. Like,
no way.
Guys weren't changing unless they absolutely had to.
Yeah.
You know, so fire department, I mean, a lot of, you know, especially with volunteer departments, they got to piecemeal and keep stuff together as long as possible.
Yeah.
So, you know, the stuff has to be serviced.
Yeah.
And
especially that narrowbanding is an interesting. I didn't even think about that. Like that would force everyone to change their spectrum, change their frequency, so that so basically it was before you could have so many channels that were so broad that the FCC needed to reallocate that space, right?
Yeah. So like
for other communication and other stuff.
Specifically the VHF band. The VHF band was just kind of a mess. So like there's no like in UHF there's dedicated like inputs and outputs for like repeater pairs and stuff like that. Where VHF, you could have an input in one location and then 30 miles away it's the output for a repeater.
So you have conflicts.
There's lots of conflicts. So and it was just it became so congested, and that was it. It drove like the push to 700-800 megahertz trunking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But so they kind of had to do something, and narrowbanding kind of opened up more bandwidth so we could put more frequencies and get some more spectrum in there.
It basically put more rules around which channels and frequencies firefighters had to be communicating on, and like we're public safety, right?
Yeah.
And so then as a radio service, I feel like that's a perfect combination. You have a legislative initiative that says, hey, you got to update all your stuff.
Companies
now you guys are like...
Companies make millions.
Bingo. That's so
but
funny.
Even the small, it was just sales and putting radios in.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people didn't realize was that narrowbanding, you kind of lost your coverage a little bit. So like if you were in an area where wideband, maybe if you were on a portable, it was a little scratchy, but dispatch heard you. Narrowband, you were just noise.
Oh, really?
So there was a lot of we came in, put a new repeater in, narrowbanded everything and went away. But really they needed to look at actually antenna height, adding more receive sites and stuff like that, but people didn't do that. So
you were really like a consultant for, like, if a fire department they would call tonight on the early days and say like, hey, like I can't communicate. This change occurred. Now I can't hear dispatch and I need someone to help.
We do a lot of that. A lot of, with 20 years in fire service and firefighting and as a dispatcher, I've been on both sides of the microphone and in between. So like there's things that as a firefighter, you don't get or don't understand. And there's a lot. There's great fire chiefs who are absolutely just bulldogs on the fire ground, but then they're like, okay, I get promoted to chief, but I don't know anything about radios.
Yeah.
Like I just know, like I pick it up and I talk on it.
That's so interesting.
Well, you need someone who truly understands what you need.
In the lighting world, we play in a funny spot. I've always told people that we're sort of like in between. I speak firefighter and I speak engineer.
Yeah.
But like I'm not a professional fireman. I'm not a professional engineer, but I fit in this unique spot. And it's just communicating between the two. But having done the job both in the fire ground and then done the job both in the business, now we can marry these things together. And it sounds like a similar story of like, I have a background, personal or passion, whatever, in the ham world. And then you've worked as a fireman and then also worked in the dispatch office. It's like both. I think it's such a funny phrase, both ends of the microphone. That's exactly, I can picture it. That's such an important tie together.
Really kind of how, obviously like growing up with my dad and playing radios and stuff like that. His best friend, they grew up in the CB craze, doing CB radios and stuff like that, and tinkering and blowing radios up and stuff like that. That's really, if you want to learn, you got to take it apart and figure out how it works, right? And I want to talk farther, so I'm going to put more batteries in it. Yeah. It's not how radios work, but as a kid, sure, Yeah. And so when I was in junior high, our friend Gene came over, and he's like, you guys need to get your ham radio licenses, right?
Oh, really? Are you a ham too or no?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
I'm studying.
That's good. Okay.
I'm studying.
When we got married, she had to get a ham radio license.
Yeah. 5 years in and still no ham license. But I'm studying. It's intimidating a little. Yeah. To me, it is.
That's fair.
I was doing fine until it got to like the frequency parts.
Oh, yeah.
And then lost.
It'll be so funny to see how that goes. It's a bit of an aside from where we're going. I'll get back to your story, but it's funny to hear, like, as you learn the business of radio communication, the ham licensure process, like a lot of it is just the fundamentals of communication. And when you understand those fundamentals, then that will help you, I'm sure, in your business world, like understand why, even though it's different bands and frequencies and all that, it's like, oh, okay, I understand the basics of the framework. And
yeah, and that's kind of like why I told us, like, it'll give you a good understanding of like radio spectrum and how it works and stuff like that. So when you had a client that calls you, it's like, hey, I need a UHF antenna or whatever, you understand what you're looking at, like, the frequencies and stuff like that. So but yeah, so we my dad got his license first, and then I started studying and I got my ham radio license.
How old were you?
I was in like 6th or 7th grade.
Oh, you were a kid?
Yeah.
I remember when I'm a ham too. I don't know if our audience knows that. KJ4SYR, pretty sick. But it
KB9SUY.
That's awesome.
And when I was like, it was funny because like in ham radio, like especially when I was a kid, like the old timers are always like kind of old and crotchety on the radio, you know? And so like I'd always get yelled at on the radio. So I made my own acronym was Shut Up Youngin'. So I'd be like, this is Kilo Bravo 9, Shut Up Youngin'.
That's awesome. It's funny. I remember when I was a kid, I was probably like similar age, 6th, 7th grade. And people would say like, oh, you know, you can license up and get your HAM. You don't have to be, you know, older to do it. And I was like so interested. I never did it. I was probably maybe 18 or so when I can't remember when I got my license, but I remember it was like you could get a pilot's license before you could drive, and you could get a ham radio license before you could drive. And I thought those two things were the coolest things. I didn't do either one before I could drive, but it is an interesting thing that you could do.
He's done that though in his career. Like our nickname is Benjamin Button because everybody thinks he looks so young, but he has such an old soul.
Yeah.
So when his fire department one day, they had all the kids from Fire Academy there, and they're like, you know, Lee knows so much, like, and he's so young. And I'm like, well, he's not probably as young as you think, but I said he graduated Fire Academy at 17, and they're like, what? And I was like, he didn't even graduate high school yet, so he is kind of an old soul. And they're like,
they found that loophole, by the way, and changed it.
They did, but yeah, so it throws people when he says like I've been in fire service for 21 years, and they look at him and they
like
kind
how
of
old are you? I was like 38. Like what?
What?
You know, like yeah. So my dad worked in the city of Chicago at a Sweetheart. He was a electrical mechanic. Worked at Sweetheart Cup. They produced paper cups, and he did.
Oh, really?
So I wanted to talk to him on his way home from work. So we put up CBs.
No way.
Yeah, like
how far was it from where you lived?
Probably about 20 miles or so. But yeah, it's.
Far enough would have been hard on a CB.
Yeah.
Well, no, because we put a. We
You did right.
We did it right, but it's
this was no
like,
handheld.
You couldn't. It was just listening to see. It was just not clean.
Yeah.
Like,
how long ago was this? Back in
that was like 95, 96, like right around there. So like my dad's like, I don't want you to listen to that. You know what I mean? So then his best friend came over and it was like, you need to get your ham radio license. And that was cool. And it opened up a whole new world for me because we joined the local radio club.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
The guys at the radio club were the radio techs that worked for the railroads and the local like Motorola service centers and stuff like that. So I had a whole world of these Elmers basically that I got to learn everything from.
Yeah.
And it was just, what about this? What about that? I mean, that's how I grew up. I questioned everything.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned. So I was like, show me this. How does this work? What do you think about this? And like, I got to learn all that from those guys.
Tell me about the ham radio club world, because this is something that I never got into and wish that I did. But the so an Elmer is like almost like a mentor in the radio world.
In the ham radio world, Elmer is a mentor. Yeah.
And these clubs exist. You know, I almost think about 20 years ago or maybe 30 years ago, they were a different environment today because there's all this, you know, you can get an Echolink cell phone, all this stuff exists. But before the internet and before that, radio was the communication method if you wanted to go other than the telephone, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so when you think about those clubs, like what was the purpose? What did you guys do? Or like, walk me through a get together. What was a get together like?
You know, I think ham radio is what drives technology. So whatever you see in mainstream now probably ended up in a ham radio guy's bench trying to, you know, like right now, like all of LMR is almost all IP based. Well, ham radio was doing, we're like the first ones doing that, you know, Echolink and stuff like that. Like ham radio drives technology. It always kind of has. Because if you,
especially in the land mobile radio space,
like it's hard pressed to find an RF engineer who's not a ham.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it just kind of goes.
So it's
hand
the
in
people
hand.
that do communication of any new tech, like they're interested in how things travel over the air.
And that's the whole point of ham radio is to serve the public, serve mankind, and to push the boundaries of technology.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like, and it when I like her studying her thing, like people don't realize is like, so almost every astronaut that goes up is a ham.
Yeah.
And they have a ham radio station.
Have you ever communicated with the space station? Have you really?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's pretty neat, you know. And so she's like, you know, we're watching the online YouTube classes for her, and she just pauses and she looks at me and she's like, "You can talk to them." I was like,
"Oh yeah,
I can bounce signals off the moon."
Do they have a? That would be so cool. Can you imagine? So are you into DXing and long range stuff too?
You know what? It's funny. So like, I was such a so into just the fire department. Like I was in the police department. I was just like VHF, UHF. That was my thing.
Yeah.
Now that I'm older, I'm like, you know, maybe it's time to try to do something a little different. So
Yeah.
like I upgraded to my General a couple years back, and I'm like, it's on the road game, but now when you're running your own business,
Yeah. How much time is there?
there's sometimes there's no time to do that. Eventually, you get some breaks in, and I'll do something, but like, yeah, eventually.
You programmed our garage door to be open by radio.
I think that's a great idea. I think there should be definitely.
I did not know that was such a thing one day.
12-mile range on your garage door.
So
Perfect.
I basically took a mobile radio, and it was programmed off quick call on my ham radio, one of my ham radio channels.
That's
Call
awesome.
sign, send the tones, boop, the garage opens up.
That is so funny. So one of the things I know about ham, just from my background, that I love about it is it's non-commercial, and so it's really like this playground for technical people that love RF communication and love this kind of emerging tech space. Even though it's legacy tech, it still is like it's this creative playground of development where you can do stuff, but the boundary is it can't be for business. And so it's funny to hear how like you've got this radio business that lives in the commercial world, and meanwhile this is a synergy world that's like a sandbox for the commercial world that's in. It's not really play. I mean, there are legitimate uses that are non-commercial uses, like the Skywarn and like all the the CERT program, like all these people that need communication stuff, but it still is like a. I don't know. We think about our engineers and people that are in the engineering world. Like there are places where people spend their time thinking about what's the emerging tech that's coming out and where do they play with it in their free time. And this is like it's got to be the free time space for the RF world, kind of like you're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, that was the cool thing about ham radios. Like there's something for everybody. And there's, if you get bored with one thing, you can find something new to do.
Well, that's where I was going. I lost my train of thought there. Yeah. So the thought is like, as you think about, if you want to communicate with the International Space Station, you can learn how to be a ham. You can schedule your timing. You can get into all the telemetry and trigonometry of when you're going to have your angled antenna, and boom, you hit them. Or you get into DX, or you get it, which is long range. Like you can have a simplex communication across the world where you're bouncing off the atmosphere, or you can be in like, the Echolink stuff, which is where you tunnel through the internet across into other countries. There's so many places you can play in this space that it's almost like this creative playground. And I think it's so interesting where you can progress from like just a general, like a basic technician license through a general, add code, add all these things. And as you're learning, you can expand your scope, and it's a cool spot. I don't know. I think it's a cool spot to be.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's guys that like, you love climbing mountains. Well, there's whole groups that do DX expeditions where they climb to the top of a mountain carrying all their equipment, set up a ham radio station for like a week and do contacts. I mean, like, these guys are extreme.
Yeah, it's almost a sport, right?
It's like, and like, so there's, I think the biggest craze over the last like 15 years is a lot of prepper guys are getting into it. Like, hey, you know what? What happens when everything goes down? In junior high, we had like an 8th grade bike trip. So we would go through, like, we had like an Isaac Walton preserve. We rode the trails, kind of like a part of the science thing. You got to look at the different species of plants and stuff like that. Then we rode to the local recycling center and, got to see how recycling, and then, came back. Well, I got to go on all the they split it up for the 8th grade classes in like 3 trips. So I got to go on all of them because I had a ham radio.
So you could call for emergency.
Yeah. So awesome. one of the teachers that led it was a volunteer firefighter, Rick Druce, if you're out there. So he's so he's like, Lee, you're going to come on all these. And we had a student who fell off the bike, got sick. And so I called the school with the auto patch.
That's awesome.
And they sent somebody from the school to pick up the kid. And so that's how I got rides home from school in high school.
That's used to call on his radio.
Call on the ham radio. Hey, Mom, I'm on the ham radio. Don't swear. Well, swears anyways. But, come pick me up from school. All right, Lee. And, and then before cell phones.
Yeah. That's so funny.
Now everyone has a cell phone. So.
Yeah. Yeah. But you have said if, like, during COVID, like, everything shut down.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people were saying, like, what if the cell phone, what if and he was like, well, I'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a ham radio operator.
Yeah.
I mean, I never thought about it until then. He's like, I'll have a way to communicate to people, to his other ham friends if need be. So
how did ham begin to bridge into the commercial world, especially into 10.8? Like, I feel like when you were a kid, you're like, 10 years old, your ham license. Mm-hmm. And then at some point, was it Gene was your buddy that you started the business with?
No,
it was actually
Gene was the Elmer.
Yeah. So then I met Tom and his dad, Gunderson is his name, and his dad was a ham and his grandpa was a ham. So they were late, like generational hams. His dad was also a volunteer firefighter. So him and his dad, and his dad connected right away.
Yeah.
You know, and so it was just kind of like, we started, he's like, hey Lee, I want to put a repeater up. I'm going to start working on it. Help me out, you know, and it was just kind of that. And before we know it, we got like 4 or 5 repeaters up running, and then we're like, you know, let's start a business. So we decided to try to start a business. And
and you being in the fire service world, you were already helping guys with their radios and programming. He was the guy.
I programmed all our department radios. I installed all our radios. I maintained everything, you know, and I did all everyone's lights. I was that guy.
Yeah. Every fire department has someone that's like the lights and radios guys.
But I was the guy that actually knew what he was doing. My stuff didn't start on fire.
Sure. Okay. You break the stereotype.
And that came from my dad's work ethic. My dad was like, if you're going to do something, do it right.
Yeah.
So
he is when it comes to that, I will say, I tell people all the time, he's a perfectionist.
You're not the radio guy that gets the bad rap. You're the one that gets the good one.
Well, we do upfitting too. And I'm, knock on wood, we rarely get calls for problems. We actually get more calls to fix other people's work.
Yeah.
And that's like been the thing where, you know, he's so calm about it and he's so great about it. But I'm the one that I'm kind of like, well, if they would have given us the car in the first place, it wouldn't be, you know, like he's
hey, as a service business, it's not all bad, right? Like
he's like, but he's like, no, it's fine. But he is meticulous in his work, and it is important, like especially when you're doing like a Chiefs buggy, you got to make sure everything's like ready to go. And
they key up and can't get a hold of dispatch, and there's a problem.
Or like, even the lights, like we put lights. I mean, if they put on their lights and something gets fried on a call, we're gonna get a call. So so
I mean, there's just like any business, there's always hacks, you know, and like there's people like that can be okay at wiring lights, but no clue about radio.
Yeah. And
coax is not the same as a positive, and you know, you can't just splice stuff together. And I'm like, I was actually putting an interior light, and I took this thing apart, like, this thing's a mess. And the guy's like, hey, you know, can you look at my radio? I can't transmit more than a block. And the person had bought the antenna mount with it pre-connected with the antenna, but couldn't get it through where he needed, so he cut it.
No, and then tried to split a coax. That's good.
Stripped it, soldered the wire. I'm like, no, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
So
that's funny.
Yeah. Lots of stuff like that.
I want to know more about your background in public safety, because I've heard bits and pieces of a story through time where you've been a dispatcher. Were you a volunteer fireman, or you worked at a fire station somewhere? Tell me about your relationship with public safety.
Yeah. So I wanted to be a fireman since I was a little kid.
Like, there's record proof. No, I
grew up in a firehouse.
Yeah,
like so the fire department I work at, we're in. I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, and like we blew the siren for every time we still
outdoor big like public address.
They still do.
So
awesome.
we moved from that little town to the town just south of that, just for better schools and stuff like that. But my dad was still on the fire department, so if I heard that siren, I raced my bike back home as fast as I can, because I was going on the call with my dad, you know.
Oh, that's awesome. So you were in the fire service for a long since you were a kid.
Yeah. Yep. So it was pretty much predestined. So I just had a passion for it. So like I chased fire trucks all the time, and just watching houses burn and watching them go to work and do stuff. Like I just loved it.
How did you do your training? Was it like you started as a junior and then did night school or whatever?
Yeah. So when I turned as soon as I turned 17, I joined a local fire department. From some senior guys who were like, hey, go to this department. They're going to get you your state certifications. You know, get that first, do that. So I joined that fire department, and my senior year of high school, went through the fire academy, and I was sitting in English class, reading my firefighter 2 book. And
put your normal book behind it. So
the teacher comes up, you're like, Lee, that's not English. I was like, no, that's English. So, I mean, I was like, so that was, so just full on ahead. That was all I was going to do, was be a fireman. As soon as I turned 18, I started getting a paycheck. And then
Nice.
so the area that I was working in was transitioning from like that really like home community type thing where like economics started to change. So there was a lot of people leaving the area, and it kind of you lost that like sense of community. So that's where you see like the decline of like the volunteer to, we have to start staffing the firehouse with people, and the call volumes are increasing and stuff like that. So I was working as a part-time fireman, like night and day. I was just worked my part-time shifts. Yeah. Then I went home and ran the payout side, call side of it, like to breathe it.
And then you decided to throw in some dispatching in the mix,
so then
that wasn't enough. You know?
Yeah, probably about 6 or 7 years into being a firefighter, I was like, I want to be the guy that puts out the box alarms. So like, I grew up in the south suburbs, so Chicago area is known for the mutual aid box alarm system in Illinois.
Tell us about it for anyone that's not from that area.
So the MABUS system was based off of the Chicago box alarm system. So like the actual pull stations. So like before there was 911 or anything like that in most big cities like that, you ran, if you needed a fire department, you ran to a street corner and you pulled the fire alarm box. And on that box had a specific number, and it would tap it out to the fire alarm office.
Just over some wire or something?
Over telegraph wires. And it would print out on ticker tape and ring bells the alarm. And then the fire alarm operator would go to a box, pull it out, pull that box number that correspond to it, and it would give the closest assignments for a fire response.
For which fire departments and whatever, they tell you where to go.
Yeah, which stations were closest. And then when it could upgrade from there, it was all predetermined who the closest, and that's where you got 211, 311, 411, 511. So probably about the 60s or 70s, I believe, was a fire chief who had left the city of Chicago and went to the suburbs and was like, well, we need something similar to this. Because in the suburbs, it was, hey, dispatch.
With phone trees and stuff.
Yeah, hey, call this department, see if they can send this. I don't like that guy. Call this guy. So it was just no seamless way of getting help.
And probably not very fast either.
Not very fast.
Chaotic,
the key is.
So they adopted that and created the box card system. And then so it spread through the suburbs as like fire districts. And so they were grouped together, usually on the same radio frequency, and then they had mutual aid system. So when my dad started, it was like he started, I think 1980 is when now it's their divisions, but back then the district started a mutual aid system. And so the local dispatch, it was it bounced around, but like Dalton was the big one. And so our area, the big fire factory, like the towns that burned a lot, with Harvey, just still does. And so like you hear, car 12 to Dalton Mutual Aid, give me box 3, blah blah blah, and then everybody
they know
went. So you grew up like all the guys that you spent your time going to fires in other people's towns.
Yeah, because it was all run mutual aid.
It was all run mutual aid, So
yeah,
when I started, like I started in Glenwood, like we probably had maybe 4 or 5 working structure fires a year.
Yeah,
a lot of heavy extrication because we ran interstate, but because of the mutual aid system, we were going to everybody else's fires.
Yeah,
so you got a lot and then as the area kind of changed, the fire load increased. So towns that really ever burned, the whole area burns like crazy now. So like it's I've been to a lot of fires.
Yeah, if you want to be a fireman, it's a place to be. Yeah,
so people are like, oh, you're just a volunteer. I was like, yeah, except for I went to like 6 working fires this week. Because I don't have a day off.
Yeah,
and so it was quite an adventure. So, so when I started, we had transitioned to a centralized dispatch center to do all those mutual aid box alarms, and I was like, that'd be really cool to do that, right?
Yeah.
So I was doing radio work.
Yeah, because you love the radio. It's like, I love the tech. I love the fire.
Be surrounded by them for 12 hours a day.
All right. So I was working for a mom and pop radio shop, not making a lot of money, and I started doing service work for that center because they're a part of a fire district.
Yeah.
And I was actually online looking up their billing information, and they had a nighttime shift slot open for nighttime dispatcher. And I was like, well, I don't like waking up in the morning. I like staying awake all night. So I was like, this would be perfect. And so I actually applied for it and didn't originally get the job.
Oh, really?
Because the one chief was like, he doesn't have any dispatch experience. And the supervisor's like, he's a fireman and a radio tech. He's going to make the best dispatcher.
Yeah, that's so
And they're
funny.
like, no, we're going to hire this person. They have dispatch. And they didn't work out. So they ended up calling me.
No way. That's awesome.
So
did you have any idea how to do dispatch, or you had to go learn it then? Or like, I guess you train? I mean, I don't even know. I've never been in a dispatch center.
So they were using a computer-aided dispatch system. So I had never seen that before. So I had to learn how to do that and like learn to do the EMD side of it. But I've been a firefighter and EMT. I know how to talk on a radio because like that's what I do.
Yeah.
So it was really easy. It was
awesome.
really easy transition.
Yeah.
So and it was interesting. Like I got to do a lot.
What was it like? I mean,
so we were a fire only dispatch center.
interesting.
So we didn't.
So call would come in to Central and then get dispatched, or
Yeah, it would
Fire,
go, it would go to
Yeah.
the local police or sheriff's dispatch center, and then if it was fire related for one of our jurisdictions, they would transfer the call to us, and then we would process it.
Interesting.
So it fluctuated, but I think at the height when I was working there, we had like 7 or 8 departments and 3 MABUS divisions.
Oh, interesting. That's all the mutual aid system.
Yeah, just doing the box alarms for them,
Yeah.
and the 2 divisions. 24, which I was a part of, in 22, burnt constantly.
Oh, so there was a
we
lot
were
of
doing
activity.
Lots of activity. And there were
Yeah.
some points so we had 3 positions. You had a dedicated call taker, the MABUS / dispatcher for one of the localities, and then the other radio dispatcher, they handled the other localities. So there was times where I'd be doing dual box alarms in one division and the other. And I lived for it.
That's so
Yeah.
cool.
And like I had really cool partners, but probably one of my favorite partners to work with was my buddy Timmy.
Yeah, because he's a fireman.
Oh, really?
Like
Oh,
second generation.
second generation fireman, his dad, and so like we just naturally clicked.
He was like you'd go down there. There was always 3 of them at once, but there was 3 of them. Him and Tim and Ryan were kind of the 3 guys that always worked together. And if I'd go bring him lunch or something, you'd see them on YouTube watching like fire trucks and calls,
so
and
just
I'm like,
geeking out about the
I'm
fire
like,
yeah.
you're taking the calls and then you're watching someone else's calls. I'm like, isn't this a little overstimulating? Like,
Yeah. So it's funny because like before I got into dispatch, I really wasn't much of a fire buff. I loved being a firefighter, but like collecting stuff or like looking outside of I really
It's
wasn't.
like, I got plenty here. I don't need to worry about the rest.
Yeah, they totally changed.
Interesting.
So like I got the opportunity to work with like some retired fire alarm operators from Chicago that were working like part-time at Orland and like talk about like just history.
Yeah.
Those guys were absolutely amazing. So before the city now, like the city of Chicago now, it's all consolidated in one 911 center. But before it was all separate, and they had 2 fire alarm offices. They had Maine and Inglewood. They were totally separate buildings, totally separate locations, and they did their fire dispatching out of that. These guys didn't need a computer system. They knew every firehouse, what was in it, every box alarm, who was the closest. It was all in their brains. Like
That's so
they
interesting.
were better than a computer system.
I think about a modern CAD system now. It's just like it pops up. You just click the buttons. You're just basically running through. You ask the EMDs, whatever. But it's not like back then. I mean, you really would have had to
you
concatenate that data.
really had to know your stuff, and like to listen to these guys and like talk with them, like were just absolutely phenomenal.
That's so
Absolutely
cool.
phenomenal. So like, yeah, there's a lot of really cool guys that were just amazing. And then like as the CAD came in and things transitioned, like those old dogs kind of got pushed out. They're like, oh, we don't need you anymore. But really, like that type of people and that knowledge is like you can't replace that.
Yeah.
Because when it does go down, those are the guys.
They're the ones that can just keep the system running. Like, all right, well, I know what's around. I'll keep dispatch, and you guys figure out the system.
So, and that happened to us. Like, there was a couple times like we had our CAD server literally started on fire.
That's good.
And
Dispatch to everybody, please come to my office.
So it was myself and my partner Tim and one of the part-timers who was a full-time firefighter. And like if it was the time to happen, it was these guys because like we were like, this is gonna be fun now. Because we literally like made
Got a
our own
handheld
status
or
board. Literally he would write the call down on a ticket, roll back, hand it to me, and I would dispatch the companies out, put them, and if you watch, like you can go on YouTube and watch the guys like in the Chicago Fire Alarm Office doing it.
Like old school,
like ticket, slide it down, he picks it up, opens the stations and taps it out. That's how it was. And it was like, that was like the most fun we ever had.
It's funny to think about how business and personal passions and professional careers can all merge in some things. And the old adage of like, oh, if you love it, you never work a day in your life. It can be true. It cannot be true. It's still hard work. But it's like when you're doing something that you really enjoy and that you love, it's like, oh, yeah, give me the hardest. People would think that's the hardest day in my career. It's like I'm doing all this crazy, like I'm doing this whole system manual. I'm doing it old school. But meanwhile, it's like, no, for someone that loves that system and that process, that can be an exciting day where it's like.
Yeah. So my director that hired me, He was like just another radio nerd like we were. And it was, we're pre-narrow banding. So I got hired in like 2007. So 2012 was on the rise. And he's like, we have to redo our whole radio system. He's like, he brought me in. He's like, Lee, what do we need to do?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. We sat down and we got to build from scratch what we wanted for our radio consoles, radios.
That's kind of cool.
And
it's a good time to be a part of it.
I did the work. So like, I was.
So you literally set it up.
Installing the base stations, setting up the lines, pulling cable. So I got to do that got paid to do that part time.
That's so cool.
So I got to do stuff that most people never gotten to do in their life.
Yeah.
I was pretty lucky. Yeah. But it's funny. So I got to tell this story because it kind of all is the reason why I decided to start a business. So when I was like 13 or 14, I became a police cadet in my police department.
Oh, really? Right? Oh, wow.
Of course, I had to have my own radio.
Of course, yeah.
So they had just gotten new radios there. It was the Motorola HC1250s. And so at my high school, we had full-time security guys that were off-duty cops.
Oh, nice.
And they had like radios and stuff like that, but they're like, hey, you can program radios, right? I was like, yeah. That's like, all right. So they pulled me out of class. Bring your laptop tomorrow. And pull me out of class. So I'm like, not in class, I'm programming their radios, adding channels in the radios and stuff like that. So then they got back to the police department, like, hey, can you add these channels to our radios? I'm like, sure. So I read the radio and I'm like, hey, chief, your emergency button's not set up. He's like, what do you mean? I was like, if you press this, a siren's going to go off. Yeah, literally a siren. And he's like, you got to be kidding me. So I had to reprogram the whole fleet because the vendor didn't program them right.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of clicked. And I was like, man, there's a really big disconnect between the radio world and the public safety world.
Yeah, because like every police officer would know, like, no, that's my ocean.
They
like I need
think it's going to work.
Like, meanwhile, the radio guy might not realize how important that thing is.
He may be able to like tune it and do all the technical side of it, but he doesn't totally understand what that guy's doing.
Yeah.
Really doing it as a part of his job.
As soon as things go sideways, that's my last button I can hit before.
Yeah. So like that kind of always set in my mind. I was like, man, and there's still to this day, there's quite a bit of a disconnect. So like it always sat in my mind. And I was like, and then so as years progressed and I was like doing fireside and doing that other stuff, it always like just sat in the back of my mind. I was like, I know all these worlds and I understand what they need.
Yeah.
And I know how to set the equipment up and do it the right way. And so that was kind of like the precursor and drive to like, I'm going to start my own business.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And it was never, and it's like, it's hard now, but like, it was never about making money for me.
Yeah.
I just wanted the guys to go home safe.
Yeah.
And that still is our...
Yeah,
I mean, we do like money.
Yeah. I have to remind that disclaimer. Now you got to pay bills.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, all right, I got to actually make
heard
money.
him say that to somebody, somebody new, a new client, and I'm just standing there. And I'm like, no, but we do like money.
Well, it's like every business, like you're either in the business to do the good, and your business is a sound business, and therefore it generates a profit, and that profit. One of the guys, we used to work a lot with Dave Ramsey and his team, and they always used to say that people would reward you with certificates of appreciation for the work you do with pictures of presidents' faces on them. And those are dollars. Yeah. And so those dollars can become the profit in your business, but you do good work first, and then people are willing to pay you for that good work.
Yeah.
And you do good work because the people deserve to go home at the end of their shift. Yeah. And if your business is a sound business that supports a solid reason, then the profit comes. But if you just like, people say, oh, I'm in business to make money. It's like, well... Yeah, I mean, technically, sure, we all need a job, but I mean, I'm in business to help first responders go home, and the results of that work are the fact that we can generate a profit. And it's a reasonable profit, and we do well by the business, and da-da-da-da-da, but ultimately, I'm driven to help them go home. My strategy is using radios, and the profit's generated because we have a sound business. It's like, those are the core things that have to exist. And, yeah. I want to hear your story. How did you get involved in this whole thing? It sounds like a whirlwind of fire, public safety radios, and then...
That's a heavy story.
I married into the business. No, so, well, we met in 2017, and on our first date, he flat out told me what he told you was like our first date, except he threw in his best friend, Brandon, and their whole love story. So, but he said, I had four goals in my life: to be a firefighter, to own my own business, to have my own house, and start a family. It was 4. And he goes, I have the 3, I just need the last one. So he married a single mom with 2 kids. Boom. Winner, winner.
Awesome.
Just handled that goal right out.
it,
But
yeah.
you were about a year in at 10-8 when one of our vendors sent you an email and said you had to meet a quarterly goal for selling their product, and you didn't. You were caught off guard by that. And,
Oh, interesting.
And so he was like, how am I going to sell 30 of these? I think you had a month?
Yeah.
Like a month. So I have a business and marketing background. So
Oh, interesting.
I was like, what could he do? What could he do? I'm like, so this was 2017. There wasn't TikTok. I mean, it was like Facebook really was it.
Yeah.
I'm like, make a Facebook post and boost it. And he's like, what? I was like, boost it and let it run for 30 days and just let's see what happens. I'm like, right now at this point, that's your best option. Like if someone types in what they're looking for, it'll probably pull that up, or, the algorithm.
And this is before you were like really in the business.
Yeah, no,
you were
I was
like,
just
hey, I don't know, I'm
dating.
trying to.
Yeah,
I was
just dating.
I was just dating him. I wasn't even engaged yet. And it worked.
Sealed the deal.
That's good.
But that it worked. Yeah. He sold 30 pagers within like 20 days or something. It's like a couple departments called and he got it.
That's awesome.
And then in 2020, his partner said he was going to leave. And so actually at that time, 10-8 was kind of in a lull.
We were like, we were starting to pick up, and it was kind of getting to that point where one of us could come on full time or not.
Right.
Yeah.
But so I ended up having to leave dispatch because I got diagnosed with PTSD.
Oh, wow.
So I was involved in a line of duty death as a firefighter with somebody I had just met in the local fire community. Like,
yeah.
And all my friends were on those companies that were at that fire. Like, I knew everybody.
Yeah.
You were the dispatcher.
And I was the dispatcher. Like typical firemen, we don't get the help when we need, you know, and we try to like take care of everything ourselves. So like then this was before I even met her. This was 2010 when this happened. And so I spent like the next couple of years just like deep diving into fire behavior, hose line, nozzles, incident command system, like everything. Like I just immersed myself in the fire service to try to like deal with all what had happened. And so finally, eventually, kind of in 2018, after we got married. 2019, right?
It happened in 2019. We got married in 2018, and then in October today, 2018.
Yeah. Congrats, it's their anniversary today.
It's our anniversary. That August, the following August in 2019, I could see signs that it was wearing on him. But finally he had to take a break. And then he got therapy, and the therapist was like, listen, being in dispatch, you're
still reliving it every day, huh?
Yeah.
You're triggering yourself all day long.
Every time the phone
So
rings,
he made a decision to leave.
Yeah. Dude, I got a story about that.
And take a break. And then
full-time into the business?
Full-time into the business.
I didn't have any. So we had to make a decision. And there was,
we were not,
I couldn't go back to work,
Yeah.
And she was just barely, she was working at like a board company at the time.
No, I was at the township. I was at a government job, so I just got it too.
I was making really good money, and we prayed about it, and so I.
You took a leave.
I took all my time I could to try to figure out what's going on.
See if you can get your head straight.
And then finally I was like, I can't go back. And so I turned in my resignation, and unfortunately I had to empty my pension to pay the bills, and we just kind of put it in God's hands. And
tonight, here we go.
Yeah, and so unfortunately my partner...
And then 6 months later, his partner,
the family-owned business he was working, he had spent his career working at, they closed the doors.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And so we were both sitting in his living room like,
what do we
do?
Yeah.
He decided to leave 10.
He's like, Lee, you have the clientele, everybody. And he's like, I guess you're going to have to take it.
Oh, interesting.
And he had done like all the business side of it.
Yeah. So he was...
And I really didn't, because we were like in two different locations all the time, I didn't understand any of it.
Yeah.
And I really, I sometimes I still don't think I understand it. So like it was
basically like January of 2020. We sat down and had a talk, and he goes, "Do you want to come on? You know the business side of things. I know the business stuff. I know just enough radio knowledge. I joke with people, but he's seen it. I know just enough to get my foot in the door." And then when they start getting technical, then I'm like, and here's Lee Jones. Like, I joke I'm the pager and battery person. That's like awesome. I can sell batteries really great. Ask them, because when these fire chiefs pick up their repaired radios, I'm like, do you need some batteries? We have our own line of batteries.
That's awesome.
But we agreed that I would come on board. And so in January 2020, I came on board.
It's funny how necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And that phrase sticks with me, where it's like, okay, I have to make a change. I cannot continue dispatching. I'm doing this. And then it's like, okay, well, my partner's out. Well, I need someone to help me with the business side. That's not my strength, but my wife's got the strength. I mean, I hear the same story in our business. Oh, yeah. When we started, man, I was part-time on an ambulance and run around doing lights, whatever. And then Kayama started working with us. And it was like, okay, I can't do this. I was like paying bills. Remember, I was in Germany at a trade show, and like our vendor called, and they're like, "Hey, what did they say? You owe us $100,000." And I was like, "Oh yeah,"
and you pay. I
pay off the card, and I was like, "All right, run the card." And Cam was like, "Did you just pay $100,000?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I maxed it back out again because I have the cash, but I haven't done the invoicing and whatever. Customers have paid us. I don't know where it's all going, but I know all the math works out. Yeah. She was like, "Okay, I'm done." She's working in the vet clinic. I'm done working in the vet clinic. I'm coming to work for you because we can't do this anymore. This has to be clear. But it's funny how, like, in business, especially in small business, there's sometimes husband-wife teams become like these perfect teams because you know enough about the business and you're around it. And then it's like, I was always the tech in our business, and she brought the structure. Now you fast forward 20 years or whatever, it changes. But
yeah, and I joke, like, in my history of working, everywhere I worked, I would want to learn anything. Like, if you wanted to teach me but accounting, I would always say I'm not good with math. Like, I don't like math. And now I'm doing our books. So and we get it checked. Like, we have a CPA firm, and but there's things like you had told your story with taxes and stuff, and like we're learning that with just different things with like our state taxes and stuff like that. And sometimes it's so confusing. And I mean, I'm not too proud. I call the state and it's like, hey, tell me what to do here, because I don't want to mess this up. I'm really blessed. When we moved, I became friends with a group of women, and two of them are accountants.
Oh, that's awesome. So you can ask, like, hey, what do you think about?
Oh, yeah. I will be like, hey, this is going on, and how do I fix it, and what do I do? And she's like, hold on, let me look up your stuff online. And then I'm like, okay.
That's awesome.
So, Terry and Kim have been like my leaning posts. Like, I know enough to, reconcile and all that stuff, but when it starts getting a little technical, I'm like, hey, I need a little help right now. So, but yeah, 2020 I came on, and we just now, I would say, in the past, since we moved, it's been taking off more and more, and we're on the verge of like, I'm gonna be able to quit my day job.
Is that kind of your goal? You want to continue building the business and grow it to where then you can work full time in the business and continue to
I think it really is just wherever God wants us to do.
Yeah, it is
whatever direction He wants. It's pretty much. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, so I quit dispatch, and now I have this thing that I don't know how to deal with.
Yeah.
And I gotta try to figure out how to provide for our family, and I'm like not functional right now, There was some really dark roads, but eventually, like, it was pretty much all kind of like.
You did become a Motorola instructor.
Yeah, no, I was.
He also did that.
Yeah,
a brief time.
It fell in my lap. A buddy was like, "Hey, I sent this on Indeed." So I worked for that for a few years, flying over the country teaching dispatchers.
No way.
How to use
how to use their consoles and stuff like that, and that was. It was interesting, and like I had to do it, and I got through. I only got through it because of her and God, but like I got to the point where my PTSD had finally taken over, like my anxiety, and I couldn't function anymore.
How do you deal with that today? Are you able to kind of get your head back clear when you're in work mode? You're in work mode, or
no? So a lot of it really was just we were still living up near in the suburbs of Chicago, and that area was just changing, and we knew we were going to have to move soon, and just God opened doors.
Yeah, it was I tell people all the time, we were not in a place to move. But for some reason, I was like, let's see what happens if I apply to get a house. And they were like, they gave me ungodly. Like at one point, I told the lady, I don't want that much money. And she's like, what? And I was like, I don't want that much money. And she's like, oh, okay. I was like, we're good where we're at. Don't keep adding numbers, And we moved, and that was the best thing.
Where we ended up at, we weren't even looking. We were actually looking at a totally different area.
Did you move your business and everything?
Everything.
Yeah, everything. And
just is this change of scenery type of thing? Like
it was like I was surrounded by my trauma.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just gotta break away from that.
Yeah.
And get yourself out of that situation just so you can start healing. But biggest thing was I reconnected with my faith, and we found a great church, and that's what really started. It was all God that started that process. And
that's so cool,
because it was like 3 years of like 10-8 was there.
Yeah.
We were selling pagers, but it was like if Lee had radio's program, you weren't getting them as quickly. And we were very upfront. We had like a core group of departments that are like just stuck with us.
Yeah.
And so I made phone calls to the chiefs and Lee talked, and they were surprisingly like understanding. And I am going to give a shout out to because it is Munster Fire Department in Munster, Indiana. They were amazing. They held jobs for him. Like,
oh wow,
they actually did not outsource to anybody else. They waited. They're like, give him as much time as he needs, and it was just shocking because we're still small, but we had maybe 6 regular departments on a regular basis. So it was nerve-wracking to have to one admit what's going on, but then two say like, projects are going to be delayed right now. And they were. Everybody was really understanding and just kind of waited. Munster, though, was amazing with us and just held off on some stuff. You did a Chiefs buggy, I think, during that, and it took you a little longer than normal, but they didn't rush them.
It's interesting how in this industry, like in public safety, you have this innate connection with the people that you work with if you've done the job. Like, I go to a fire station and show off a light bar or whatever, and it's like, yeah, okay, you're trying to sell me something. And I'm like, listen, man, you can buy, this is what's on my fire truck. This is the way I did it. Here's my experience. And when I was on this job at this time, this is how it worked. People are like, oh, so you're one of us? And then you have, I don't know what you call it, but it's almost like a bank account of trust that sometimes you can go and dip into if you need to. And it's like, I had to make a call the other day to a customer down in Texas. And I was like, listen, guys, we built this thing. We shipped you a bunch of them. You paid us for them. And when they manufactured them, there was something wrong. And so, listen, I'm just going to shoot you straight as I can shoot you. This was a problem that we've now identified. We have a solution for it. It's going to be 3 weeks. I know you don't have 3 weeks, but I can't I'm not Superman. This is the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I need you to trust me that I have your best interest at heart. And when they come back around, they're like, all right, you're one of us. I trust you. There is that exists where you've been in the job. I think in my role, I have been fortunate to avoid some of I've been on some really bad calls, but for whatever reason, I haven't been stuck in the PTSD type of thing that just sometimes the switch flips. But I know folks that have, and I know that when you think about that emotional bank account you have with your customers, and you can say, listen, man, like every one of us is at risk for this occurring, and you're at risk, I'm at risk, the next fire chief's at risk. And like when that happens and you can just shoot someone straight and be like, look, this is not business, this is not whatever, but I'm just stuck here. It's the stigma and it's hard. But when you're in that club, I think our audience is broadly firefighters, and they start businesses and they run businesses. And it's important to remember, like if you serve fire departments or you serve others, there is the reality that life also, from being a public servant and going into business, follows you through there. That life as a public servant sometimes carries risk, and sometimes that risk is the emotional burden of the job itself. And that can fuel you or that can hinder you. And it can do both at the same time, but it's like, you can't ignore it. And I think that's the hardest thing is people stigmatize it,
The group of clients we had that knew Lee, and they really knew, like they've known Lee for years, but even before 10-8, I had at one point, the way I could get it through to them is actually one morning I woke up and I felt like something was off in our house. Like, you can't figure it out.
I don't know what's up. Yeah.
And I'm walking around the house and everybody's sleeping, and I'm like, what is going on? Well, Lee had built a full, I guess, old school dispatch.
I had a full Zetron radio console in my house.
Yeah. A functional one, by the way.
That's awesome.
And I looked downstairs where our office was set up, and every radio was turned off.
Huh.
Like, that's never happened. Like, every radio was turned off. Like, to the point where his one best friend, Joe, who's a radio nerd like him, I sent him a Snapchat, and he's like, they're all off. And I was like, this isn't good. Like, I was like, this isn't good. And so I was telling some of our clients, like, hey, Lee doesn't even have radios on in the house right now. And they're like, oh.
And they know you well enough to know that's not normal.
That's not normal. So once we moved, things just got better. We're in a southern kind of part of Indiana, like south of Northwest Indiana. It's quiet. There is no, actually, it was an adjustment for us not hearing sirens all the time.
Yeah.
And that helped. And then
And the gunshots went from
yeah.
ducking to freedom. Like it's
exactly.
people enjoying their freedom, not
Yeah. But it was just different. And then slowly, like out where we're at, it's all volunteer departments. So it's a complete shift from doing union fire departments, full-time, part-time, to all volunteer. And they don't have, like, the nearest radio shop is like over an hour away. So when word got out, we were in the area.
People were probably excited, huh?
Yeah. It's been an interesting, because with the volunteer firefighters or volunteer departments, you know, I had one fire chief tell me, like, we'll give you a shot. Like, there really isn't like a political thing down here. It's not, you know, like, we'll give you a try. And then he even joked and said, you could be really bad at what you do, but we'll still refer you to someone else and be like, hey, this happened, but give them a shot. And so it's picked up now that people know where we're at. So you've been getting a lot of the volunteer departments reaching out. There's just a lot of communication stuff that needs to be fixed in our area. Yeah. And Lee's seen it from the moment we moved down there. So
can I ask you one more question about the about your transition away and like coming to grips with this PTSD that occurred? And I don't want to dwell on it, but I'm just curious how, like, our audience, like every firefighter could be experiencing this. How did you take the first step in recognizing, like, this is a problem? And it's because, like, you saw the console off and you're like, this is an issue. But how do you do that?
Can I chime in? Because I will say this. I think the spouses don't get enough credit. Like, I'm being honest. Like, yes, that's serious, but a spouse or a family who has somebody with PTSD, they're going through it with them. Like,
so you see it as much as anybody else experience it too. Hey?
And actually, after he started getting better, he thinks that I had a form of it from everything with him. But the way I saw it is, so he would come home from dispatch. He had 12-hour shifts, not 8 hours. And it would go from, hey, I need silence for 10 minutes. Like, so no one talk. Because I get it. You're in an overstimulated radio. I mean, it's a lot. Yeah. You know, I hate saying this, but it is true. Like, I had a lot of friends tell me, it's so cool. He's a dispatcher. Because they see TV. Yeah. Like, TV portrays...
Well, and they always ask us, oh, what's your worst call? And it's like, I don't want to tell you about the worst call. Actually, I want to tell you about the best call. The one I went to where there was no problem.
And then, like, my family, like, he went to a family thing once, and they kept referring to, like, Chicago Fire. Did you do this? And he's like, this is fake. Like, this isn't, you know. But I tell people, like, with dispatch, like, it's actually, like, real hard job. All you're doing is answering negative phone calls all day long. Like, maybe you deliver a baby over the phone, and that's exciting.
Congrats, yeah.
But it was I need 10 minutes of silence. Then it was 30 minutes of silence. Then it was coming home, basically not talking to anybody, going upstairs and shutting us all out. And, you know, I just kind of hung back a little bit. But then one night at dispatch, he called me in the car and he said, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I was like, okay. And you called your boss and he sent you home. And then his boss even called me to make sure he got in the door. Yeah. So I saw, like, signs.
Did you know when it was like, hey, I need help?
Yeah. And I knew I was having issues couple years before that, but it was just like, I think I was like, okay, we're going to start this radio business. So it was kind of like, that was my exit strategy.
Yeah.
I was
Oh,
like,
that's interesting. Yeah.
You know, I was like, okay, it's like, I'll hold on long enough where then this takes off. Then I can, you know, and then it was, I had another opportunity to get a radio tech's job, and I thought I had it, and it just completely fell out from underneath me.
Oh, that's got to be crushing, you know.
And then my partner, he had reached his limit and had left and like moved his family to Kentucky to kind of like start all over again.
Yeah, your guy from work.
Yeah, Timmy.
Oh yeah,
Timmy.
And I'm trying not to get emotional, but I cry a lot. And
That's okay.
You don't realize how much your partner's.
Oh.
Sorry.
Don't worry about it. It's totally fine.
You don't realize how much your partners get you through the workday.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And not having him kind of just.
That's got to be tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then after that, it just went.
Yeah, and so like, then like I'm feeling all these like emotions and stuff like that, and anger and no patience, and now I'm like reminded of stuff that happened that like my dad grew up with my dad, and so like
just that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and so like my dad, obviously being a volunteer fireman, saw a lot of traumatic stuff, but he lost his best friend, who was one of the chiefs, died of a heart attack, 38. And we were actually at the guy's house. And I kind of like looked up to him as an uncle, or another dad. And so like we were there that night before, like joking, because that's what we did. Like back then, like you just showed up at people's houses, and that was cool.
No one does that anymore.
But everyone was like, "Oh, someone's at the house."
You're not gonna really like, what's wrong?
Yeah. And so like that's what we would do. We would just kind of do that, and like the whole family, and we're like, "Hey, come over for steaks." He's like, "No, I got to work on some stuff for the fire department or whatever." And then he passed away in the night, and so like
it all just
So I started seeing stuff that I had went through with my dad, you know, and I was like, I can't do that to my kids.
Yeah.
I can't, you know, I need to try to figure this out as much as possible, you know, and I think I did a good job, but no matter how much you try to do a good job, like there's still, I never took it out on my kids. I never hit them or anything like that, but they see it.
Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden, like, dad's not going to work and dad's just sitting at home.
Yeah.
You know, and like then the drinking, and the drinking got really bad. I mean, there was a point where I was drinking a bottle of whiskey every night.
Holy cow.
Yeah, just to numb the pain, try to forget. And
then you did counseling.
Yeah, I mean, I did the counseling and I did all that kind of stuff, but basically it was just it got to the point where I was ready to do something that I would have regretted.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Oh yeah.
And thankfully, I grew up in a church and I believed in Jesus, and for a long, but I kind of fell away from my faith throughout those years as being a fireman. Like I believed in him, but I wasn't going to him. I wasn't digging into the Word to center my life. I was just trying to do everything myself, and something told me just to pick up my Bible, and I picked up my Bible, and I don't remember what I read, but I just felt God's calm peace come over me and say, "You're not alone."
Yeah.
So then it was
got better.
I was like, okay, I'm not going to do the thing that I was going to do.
Yeah,
that's good.
And then we just said, okay, it's time to get away from the area, and we moved. And when we moved down there, I stopped drinking.
Really?
Yeah, it was like a switch.
Then we found an amazing church, and we got into it, and it just.
What would you tell another firefighter? Like, if you could go back and tell yourself something, I don't know how long ago this was, a year ago, 10 years ago, whatever.
This was like, 4 years ago now?
Yeah, you know what? I'll tell everybody, I said, before that, and suicide's rampant through our industry.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And before that, my view on it was a coward's act. Like, why would you do that? Like, you know.
Yeah.
And then facing it.
Yeah.
And
it's a totally different reality.
Totally different reality. But knowing that if it wasn't for my relationship with Christ, that I had nothing else. And that was the only reason why I didn't do it. So
But counseling too is help.
Ask when the bad stuff happens, get help immediately.
Don't wait.
Yeah.
Don't wait.
So the critical incident stress debriefings, they're not garbage. They're worth leaning into. Like that stuff matters.
And you have to. So that night, we lost the fireman. I left the dispatch and I went to the critical stress debriefing at the firehouse with the guys. But that was it.
They never.
There wasn't a follow-up.
I mean, the next day he was back at dispatch taking calls. They didn't send him.
I took like 1 or 2 days off, and then when I wanted help, or I wanted time off to go to the wake and the funeral, and the fire chief that was in charge of our dispatch at the time just told me, well, I need to worry about running a 911 center. Find your own time. Find people to cover you, and that hurt.
Yeah,
like the area I came from was very political.
Sure.
And there are great guys that will take care of you, but for the most part, it's just guys trying to just make their own way.
Yeah.
And that's the nasty side of this being in the fire service and public safety. And so I never got the help that I needed, and there was no one there really looking after me to make sure I got it. And so like little things started happening where I started lashing out and getting in trouble and stuff like that, and I never...
You never realized it was you needing...
Yeah, and I never took the steps to do it because, I was just afraid.
Yeah.
And I had already kind of asked for a little bit of help and it was denied. So it's like... And
you even said, though, like for the majority of your fire service career, when you heard somebody had PTSD, you kind of just, like, it was like, oh, like... You didn't realize the severity of how it could be.
Yeah, you don't know until you're in it yourself.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
There's tons of us out here that will literally drop whatever we're doing to help you. And there's a God that's bigger than you that can shoulder anything that you're carrying. And you just got to turn to him.
Yeah.
The whole point of this show is, we celebrate and encourage people, right? It's if you want to start a business, you should start a business. Yeah. And if you lean on public safety as a catalyst to do so. But our listeners also can use encouragement in the times that are not so sunny, And I think it was interesting when we met at FDIC, you guys shared a little bit of like, hey, I've been listening to this podcast as I've been working and it's encouraging, exciting. And I think that if we look at what our mission as a business is, we like to help first responders work safely and effectively after dark so they can save lives. And our business does it through lighting. But with this podcast, our mission is a little bit broader to take care of the whole firefighter who might want to start a business, who might be encouraged by business, and the general public too listens to this show, and I think they get something out of it, hearing the differences in public safety and then professional careers and that sort of thing. But I do think there's an element of like, if there's another person installing lights on a car that's struggling with this sort of thing, I feel like the encouragement to just like, the stigma's really not that bad. Like the stigma's, it's not that bad. The stigma's not that, what's the word? Don't worry about it. Like, it's worth taking that step because it sounds like your business now is beginning to take off. You've made the transition. You've moved. You've got the support network you need. It's uncomfortable to ask for help. I'm sure I've had to do it. And it's uncomfortable.
Now I have no problem asking for help.
Exactly. But you got to go through a terrible time like that.
I had to go through a terrible time and realize you can't do it all alone.
And I think about too, like there is a large number of like first responder podcasts out there. There really is. And I wonder how many are looking like until they hear someone else or that's their way of feeling like not alone because they don't want to come out and say anything or
think about the gentleman running the dispatch place. Figure out how your staff is. That's thinking through the business construct of I need people to fill this staff. But put your firefighter hat on, put your first responder hat on. You had a buddy that got injured or killed in the line of duty. Damn it, I want to go to the funeral. And so then it's like, okay, I have to break apart the business and the first responder and recognize that I tell people all the time, especially in our customer service world, that sometimes first responders do things that don't make sense to the general public because the first responder mentality is just like, there's another underlying story you don't know. Yeah. And so you have to just understand, like, if the answer is something you don't expect, maybe there's a why. Ask the why before you just say, figure out, someone's got to cover the shift. Like, get to the deeper root of the cause. Help where you can.
Yeah, and I don't hold anything against that person because I know that they were going through some stuff in their own personal lives.
Of course.
That I didn't know about. So like there's there's a reason why everything is and why people are the way they are, how they're acting the way they're acting, and all. There's always a root cause of something. So, and I tell everybody, especially like if you go and like try to find a counselor, you might not find the person for you right away. And don't quit.
He had it
until you find that right person.
You had a great one, but then we lost the insurance.
Yeah, because then when I quit, they took my insurance from me.
He had a great one, and then when I called and I was like, "Hey, we lost our insurance," and they're like, "Well, it's $190 a visit," and I'm like, and he was going twice a week, and I was like, "Oh, I can't do that." So unfortunately, that was a struggle, and that's why too, we were mentioned before the podcast, we stumbled upon this organization that's building a free camp for first responders and military with PTSD called Heroes Rest. And I had actually met one of their friends at his firehouse at an event. And cool. It was before all this happened, and she was telling me, like, they bought the land, and they're going to do this, and they're going to have free help, and so I just remained in contact, and that's when, Lee was like, I want to start helping them out with some radio communications and stuff, because there really isn't a lot of, there's resources where people can go away and get help, but they're expensive.
Yeah, it's fun where you can use your business to help support those things.
Oh, yeah.
Like, wait a minute. I have a skill set in radios and communication.
And they need
you have a need, and I support your mission, so therefore I'm going to help with this,
Yeah, and so my main goal besides like keeping a roof over our heads and stuff,
there's that,
make sure guys are going home safe, but to support
anybody
that needs help, no matter what, and so that's my main goal, is just to be the light in a dark place for somebody.
Talk to me a little bit about what this looks like looking forward. Where are you guys going? What's kind of happening in the business right now, and that sort of thing?
Well, I tell people that's the best way I can explain it is like you're on a roller coaster and you're getting to the top, but you really don't know what's on the other side. So we're like, keep going up. We have some goal sets. We have some projects in the works that if they fully come through, and these people are smart and use us the first time around, that I will be able to leave my day job. So they don't know that. I'm sure they don't watch this podcast.
I'm hoping within like a year or two.
And get a building.
Yeah, within a year or two, if the certain projects take off, we'll have a building. I can bring on a couple people full time.
Yeah.
And we can really start expanding. I want to expand the upfitting side and the LMR side, doing infrastructure and stuff like that.
Well, and you can relate to this. This is interesting because we have friends who are in different businesses. Like we have a friend in our hometown. She has a coffee shop, and we just chit chat. And obviously, her struggles are different than our struggles.
Sure.
But one day I had to say to her, she was like, "Oh, so how's sales going?" I'm like, "Well, my sales isn't like your sales. Like you sell something that somebody wants to come in every day, most likely, and buy and purchase and whatever. When I sell some radios, I'm not going to see those people for 10 years.
Exactly.
Like you with but I mean, like you with the lighting, like
we sell a light with a lifetime warranty. I'm hoping never to touch it again.
I mean, that's a lot of people don't. And I heard you say this like on one of the, I think with Axe and All.
Oh yeah.
Like people think that small business owners have like all this money.
That's like the stereotype, right?
My 2010 Tahoe's in a shop right now getting work done on it. Like we are not, but also like they're in a unique service too. Like somebody buys a bunch of radios from us, that's great. But now I have to find someone else. We have to find another department or who needs servicing. That's why we do the upfitting too. That kind of in those lulls helps.
Yeah. How can you capture more wallet share of the same customer that already loves you? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Department buys 30 pagers. That's awesome. But they're not going to buy any more for 10 years at least.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I pride myself in my work not coming back.
Yeah. Like you.
It is one of those like interesting dichotomies where
Yeah.
it's like, if I'm going to be good at what I do, I'm hoping that I don't have to have continual service of it. But then it's almost like, okay, as a business person, what features do I develop? What other services, like what sort of maintenance? I have no idea, you know, it's like, and then that's where upfitting and where other tangential services come into play. And that's how business grows.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things I want to start branching off to is doing consulting.
Oh yeah.
Because like
You give away so much free.
I know.
You know, he
Knowledge
does
is power.
this all the time. Like, people call him, and I'm like, oh, you were on the phone with them for 2 hours. I could have charged them. And he won't. He won't. Like, he'll have chiefs call him and ask him questions, and he'll tell him what needs to be done. And you do get a lot of consulting.
Sometimes that builds credibility and trust, though, because it's like they're gonna remember 10% of it. And I tell people all the time, when we teach this class called the Science of Effective Scene Lighting, and it's pretty technical. I deliver the presentation 2 times a week sometimes, you know, and like 80% of the people that listen to it don't remember any of it. But what they remember is that person could articulate each facet that I was concerned about and had an answer that was not only just the answer, but it was well thought out, had supporting information, and could come at it from different angles. I don't remember what that person told me, but I trust that person can help me solve my problem. So then when they come to me and say, hey, listen, I went to your Science of Effective Scene Lighting. I don't know what light to put on my fire truck. Can you just recommend something? Then it's like, all right, what's your budget? What's your goal? What's your whatever? Great. I'm going to use all that stuff you don't remember, but that you know that I knew. I'm going to help you make a good decision.
Yeah.
Then all it boils down to is, do you trust that I have your best interest at heart? And am I trustworthy that I'm not going to waste taxpayer money? And if I can do those 2 things well, then ultimately that investment of time pays off later. But it's like, it's a very delicate balancing act, because if they go implement it with someone else, you know, it's one of those, like, for me, the risk is, I teach you how to choose good lighting for your fire apparatus. You go choose our competitor's good lighting for your fire apparatus. I lose the sale and you have the knowledge. But 90% of the time, that doesn't happen that way. So I count on the ones that do go that way. And the ones that don't, the good news is now they're not working in the dark. And so if our mission is helping first responders eventually save lives, then they can't do that if they choose, even if it's our competitor stuff mounted the wrong way or installed, whatever, fine. At least if you're going to choose our competitor stuff, choose it installed correctly and choose the right parts for the job. And now we've still accomplished our mission, and I can sleep at night. So
Yeah, and I think that's. So I had started I actually have a Facebook blog called First Do Fire Communications, and it was something that I had started like 5 or 6 years ago, just like my thoughts and posts and stuff like that. But probably one of the single things that have changed the fire service over the last 20 years, 30 years now would be the 2-way radio.
yeah.
But we have absolutely no training with it.
Yeah.
Think about that.
No.
I know my radio.
I can teach you.
"Oh."
I can teach you how to pump. I can teach you how to use your SCBA, how to properly don and doff your gear, and we don't talk about how to talk on a radio,
That's a really
how to
good point.
communicate. Like we're not even scratched. Like there's some really awesome guys doing stuff out in there, like Jonah Smith and stuff like that, but we haven't even scratched the surface. And so like that's something that I have a passion for training. I love training. I love instructing. So I think that's something that eventually I would like to start developing some of those programs.
Man, I
and
would
stuff
lean
like
into that, because if you create a content platform about, hey, this is the stuff they don't teach you in the Fire Academy, and you talk about some, whether it's 30 seconds of like a best practice. Hey, here's how circular communication works. This is why it matters in the ham world. It actually matters in the fire world too. Bam. And then it's like, oh, well, that's important. Oh, well, you know that, whatever, anything. You could say like, it's important to lock your radio when you're crawling around on the floor, because if you hit your button, all of a sudden now you're talking to nobody.
Yeah.
And now when you hit that E button and it's not tied in right,
Yeah.
oh, did you know you should make sure you ask to tie your E button in? I mean, these sorts of things are like, then someone may see that and say, oh, well, who's my local person? Well, your area. Boom, now they're going to call you. And they, that's a sort of business.
Yeah, like I was, so
thing,
one of the things I got to see, flying around the country was like a lot of areas that are like on trunking systems. They've set up like their firefighters emergency button to switch them to a different talk group as a Mayday talk group.
Yeah, that if no one's on, no one hears it, right?
But no one's.
Yeah, but no one's listening to that, right? Because guess who? Look at the studies. Who's most likely to come to the rescue of that firefighter? It's his own crew that's
right next to him, right? Yeah, exactly. So if
I'm in the other room and my radio doesn't decode an emergency activation because it's on a different talk group, you have to rely on dispatch
to somehow snake it back to you.
Which I don't know how many times dispatchers have caught Maydays that the incident commander missed. Like there is like a 3-circle realm of a Mayday situation that people don't realize, and a lot of it's communications based. You have that initial Mayday. It needs to go out not only to that to the incident commander, but it's the firefighters that are on the fire ground and his crews around them, and then the dispatch. So there's that safety layer built into it, and there's a lot of stuff. I'm like, none of this is taking place, or so it's kind of interesting to see that kind of stuff. And I'm like, it's funny because like people know me from like being the radio guy and stuff like that. But I will sit here and talk hours about like smoothbore nozzles and true hose and stuff like that. Like I am a nerd when it comes to. Well,
he knows lights.
I nerd on everything. But like a lot of that came from that line of duty death and what had happened, and then it died into like I was at a customer's putting radios in the truck, and he's like, hey, you going FDIC this year? And I was like, yeah, I try to go like every year. And he's like, you need to meet up with this guy named Jonah Smith. He's doing a class on the Motorola and like Mayday stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, absolutely. So then I flew down. He introduced me to Jonah, who's a battalion chief in Charlotte. Phenomenal instructor.
That's awesome.
And then all of a sudden I'm following him around FDC, and I meet Dennis Laguerre, who's like was leading the whole thing on the true inside diameter fire hose. So now I'm immersed in like all these like awesome guys, and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't ever realize all, and before I know it, now I'm down the rabbit holes with that stuff.
Oh yeah.
So like,
and then you end up on a podcast. I mean, what the heck?
Well, like so it's amazing how like one thing will lead to another, and then here you are. So yeah, I'm a total nerd.
I would encourage you guys to lean into that. The more you can network, the more if you're looking to build your business, and I think it's such an exciting journey to be on. Lean into that network, and you never know what you'll find. I would never be too worried to share your knowledge. I mean, like I might not tell someone, here, contact this vendor and buy this part. Because then they buy around you. But if it's teaching someone how best to use the tech you do, and you become an expert in that space, and you also are the expert in public safety firefighting, you know about the nozzle, you know about the relationship to the truck and the wiring and the lights and how the systems play together. And hey, you can't just cut the end of a coax cable and fish it through when you're installing lights, because now you're going to have a problem. Yeah. Then that can be the platform that you establish credibility with, that then you can continue to scale your business from. Yeah. And so I think like as a one business person in the public safety space to another, continue to lean on those experiences and those fire service things and your backgrounds in non-fire service things. You can bring sales, marketing. Fire service does sales marketing really poorly. Yeah. So when you bring those other markets in, and you can then marry those together and continue investing in helping people go home at the end of their shift, that's going to be the winning combination that helps you guys scale and reach your dreams.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing in this upcoming generation of firefighters and public safety is that we're networking and sharing ideas. There was generations where nobody would share their stuff. Well, and now, this podcast is the perfect example. Like we're sharing information, we're sharing our failures, our successes, so we all can learn from each other, and that is only going to make us a better community, a better businesses, and better community. And I think that's what's changing with the upcoming generation of firefighters.
Yeah,
I think so too. And I was going to say, like I've told you, I'm more now like handling sales calls and working with different fire departments. And past month, I've had a couple of firefighters like, why don't you carry this brand, or why don't you carry that brand? And then not knowing, because being a radio shop, you can carry multiple brands. Problem being is they have requirements for you to be that vendor. So if you don't have like 2 million coming in annual revenue, some places don't, they'll tell you no. And a couple of the guys are like, oh, I never knew that. And I'm like, yeah, you don't see that side of things. Like,
there's always been a story.
It's I get it. I would love to sell certain products.
Sure.
We've tried.
I'm also, and that's something that when I started the company now, is that I'm never going to sell a product that I won't trust with my life.
Yeah.
So I will not.
He tests out everything before we even sign something.
And I take it and put it on my radio strap, and I carry it and go to the fires and use it. And if it fails for me, then no, I'm not selling it to you. Like, I will not sell you a product I won't trust.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally
period.
Yeah.
I don't, because I don't care about money. I care about people.
Yeah. The money comes second. So how do people find you? If we're kind of winding this up, I want to make sure our audience can connect with you guys in the social space, on the web space, wherever. What's the best way to contact you?
Brandon's updating our website because of this podcast. So
Nice.
enjoy, people.
Or will it be?
Yeah. So 10-8technologyinc.com. So, but the numbers 10 and 8 because some people have written it out. And I'm like, no, that would be really long. We are on Facebook. That's heavy. Like, we post more on there than anything.
What's your Facebook @name?
What's your question? I think if you just search 10-8, it'll
INC.
Perfect. Yeah.
10-8 INC.
Yeah. And then we are on
YouTube.
We are on YouTube. Yep. 10-8 Technology Inc.
That's perfect.
And then we are on TikTok, but that's 10-8 Technology Inc. 1.
Got it.
But our logo's there. They'll see it. And we don't do much Instagram anything, but Facebook and TikTok and YouTube are our 3 that. And if you go on our site, it has it where you could send a message, like Facebook message us right away.
Yeah.
And then the emails, that's where we get a lot of questions is through our
We'll
emails.
make sure we link in the show notes as well down below where all your info is and how to get a hold of you guys.
Yeah. So we
and we can sell. We've serviced radios from other states. Like, just because sometimes people think you're in Indiana, you can only do, we get guys shipping him radios all the time, or we've had people purchase radios and pagers from other states. So it's not like we can't help you out just because you're not in our area. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Jessica and Lee, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and I've enjoyed getting to hear your story. Thanks for sharing.
No,
So
appreciate
we
inviting
appreciate
us out
this so
here
much.
and inviting us on the show.
Yeah, letting our kids hang out and watch.
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, great.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you want to be on the show or you know someone who should, head over to the2448.com and submit your business. Don't forget to follow and subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. If you thought it was 4 stars, still give us 5 stars or I will find you. See you next time. Later.